Hi, it's Rick from For Community, creating community spaces so you can connect with others and also with God. I want to talk about toxic family for one moment here. Recently on my Facebook feed, I've been seeing a lot of Dr. Phil show up. I'm not sure why, but suddenly my news feed is filled with Dr. Phil. Maybe Facebook figured out that I'm taking psychotherapy in school, and so now it's the Dr. Phil show. I've been watching some of the episodes that deal with toxic family members, where parents come down hard on their children, where parents will force their kids to look after them, force their kids to pay all their bills, and really take the children's lives away from them so that they can be taken care of, the parents can be taken care of. Watching how toxic some parents can become is really heartbreaking. It's heartbreaking because the parents have checked out, and it's heartbreaking because it really steals the lives of the children. We've talked about toxic friends. If you're following this series, we talked about toxic friends just last week, and we talked about what to do about toxic friends. What do you do about toxic family members, Because you can pick your friends, but you can't pick your family. What do you do when you have a toxic family member? What do you do when you have a toxic mother? Well, guess what? Jesus bumped into some toxic family members, and Jesus actually shows us one demonstration of having a toxic mother. And we're going to look at that in the text today. We're looking at Mark chapter 3, verses 31 to 35. Then Jesus' mother and brothers came to see him. They stood outside and sent word for him to come out and talk with them. There was a crowd sitting around Jesus, and someone said, "Your mother and your brothers are outside asking for you." Jesus replied, "Who is my mother? Who are my brothers?" Then he looked at those around him and said, "Look, these are my mother and my brothers. Anyone who does God's will is my brother and sister and mother." Hey kids, remember to keep your eyes in the background to see all the characters that are hidden back there, and make sure you tell us on Sunday what characters that you saw. Oh man, what do you do with a toxic family member? It's different than having a toxic friend. Totally different. What do you do when you have a toxic family member? In the story, Jesus isn't just kind of doing his thing, hanging out with some friends, playing video games, playing board games, going to get some munchies, and he's not just hanging out. Jesus is on mission. He is entirely wrapped up in who he is and what he's about, the mission that he's on. Jesus is doing something very important to his identity, very meaningful to who he is. Sharing the gospel and teaching people how to connect with God. That's what Jesus is totally about, but Mary doesn't see that. Mary denies his personality. Mary denies his identity, and she imposes her will onto him in a way that is attempting to take Jesus away from his identity and force him to surrender to Mary's purpose instead of his own purpose. She becomes pretty toxic. This is a total heartbreak of a passage, because in this passage we're going to see Jesus have to deal with a toxic mom. One of the reasons this passage is so heartbreaking, not just because we're talking about Jesus' mom here, but it's heartbreaking because of many people's thoughts about who God is. People like to say God is love. There's a need that people have that gets fulfilled when they say God is love. Everybody wants to be loved. Everybody needs to be loved. And we love to say that God is love because we know that our need of love is going to be fulfilled from God. But God is more than just love. He's a lot more, and he's bigger than just love. And in this moment, he does something more than just being love. He's also being on mission, and he's also protecting himself, and he's also erecting barriers in order to create safe relationships for himself and for the people who want to be in relationship with him. We see a moment of conflict between him and Mary. I mean, the question is, does he deny himself? Does he deny who he is in favor of loving his mom, in favor of keeping that relationship? Does he allow his mom to control him so that he denies his personality, his identity, and his mission? Or does he choose to be himself and embrace the mission that he's on, embrace all that God well, he is God, but if it were you and I, in that moment, would we choose to embrace our mom and do what she wants to do, or would we embrace who we feel that God has made us to be and our reason for being here, our purpose? I'd like us to look at this passage because I think we all have toxic family members. And this is really, really at the heart of all toxic relationships. Like, the deepest relationship that you have in life is probably the relationship that you have with your mom. And so there's nothing more real than this toxic relationship, and there's nothing probably worse than this toxic relationship. So we're looking at toxic relationships almost maybe at its worst. You know, the relationship when your relationship with your mom goes south. What do you do about that? Well, let's look at what Jesus did about this, right? I want us to look at two things. First, I want us to answer the question, in what way did Mary become toxic toward Jesus? Okay, so she became a toxic family member, but in what way is she toxic? And secondly, what did Jesus do about it? What was his answer? What was his response to that toxic family member that he had? Because if this is what Jesus did, then I think that you and I can take a heads up from his cue, and maybe you and I can do the same thing ourselves if you and I find that we have toxic family members. Okay, so first of all, looking at Mary and asking the question, in what way was Mary toxic toward Jesus? First of all, Mary, Jesus' mother, totally invalidates who Jesus is. She totally invalidates Jesus. Notice that Mary doesn't even want to be part of the crowd. She doesn't go into the room where Jesus is. She doesn't mix and mingle with the people sitting at Jesus' feet being taught by him. She stays outside of the crowd with the rest of the fam, and she's sort of passing notes to him from outside. She doesn't even want to be identified with anybody who would be following Jesus. She wants to be so apart, complete invalidation of who Jesus is. Okay, now wait a minute. I've done that as a parent. You know, I've had my kids being in Walmart when they were younger. They'd come up to me and say, "Daddy, you got to come to the toy aisle because I found this really cool toy, and you got to see this really cool toy. This is my life." You know, talking about a toy. And I have completely invalidated them sometimes because I knew that I didn't have the money to buy any kind of toy, regardless of how essential it was to their being. And I totally invalidated them in that moment by saying, "No, you just stand right beside me. We're going straight to the checkout." Okay, so I've done this invalidation thing, but Mary goes beyond what I have done to my kids when they're asking for toys. Toys aren't part of one's personality. Toys aren't part of a person's identity. Toys aren't essential to the DNA of a person. Mary invalidates Jesus' identity. She doesn't allow him to be who he is. And she doesn't allow him to follow the path in life that he knows he's supposed to be following, the path that he has chosen. And I know it's a little weird for me to be talking like this, you know, because Jesus is God, right? And God is on mission. But I'm trying to help us see Jesus as a human, like you and I are humans, because the Bible says that Jesus was tempted in all of the ways that we're tempted, and he shares all of our weaknesses. So let's look at Jesus in his humanity right now, because this is a real relationship that Jesus has in his life, right? He's pursuing his identity, and he's pursuing the purpose for his life. And Mary completely invalidates him and says, "No, I that's wrong. Yeah, I'm going to tell you who you are, and I'm going to tell you what your life is about." That's what Mary's doing right here. Let me pause for a second and let me tell you something that I believe is true about you. God created you on purpose for purpose. You are made in the image of God, and in some way you reflect God's glory. And it's sometimes hard for us to look at other people and say, "Oh yeah, I can see how you reflect God's glory." But the reality is that we all, in some way, reflect God's glory in a small way or in a big way. Your personality is entirely valuable and valid. You know, I would not want to be the one to invalidate who you are. You know, God validates who you are because you are created by him, for him, with purpose. If a family member is invalidating one of the ways that you bring glory to God, or one way that you reveal God's glory somehow through your passion, through your purpose, through what you're doing, that person is toxic. Mary completely invalidates Jesus' personality, his core identity. Second, Mary also tries to control Jesus. And I think, beyond the whole invalidation thing of one's identity, I think we might understand this control thing a little bit better because it's something easier for us to identify. We may have expected that if anybody is going to get behind Jesus and support him in his ministry and his mission, it's going to be his mother, Mary, with that special calling on her life as God sent an angel, Gabriel, to tell her, "You who are highly favored, God has chosen you," and then the miracle of Jesus comes from her. You'd expect her, who was kind of touched by a miracle, spoken to by an angel, you'd figure that she'd be on track, right? You'd figure that she'd be on mission and she'd be behind Jesus as he goes about his business, because she knows better than anyone, right, that this is God, right? But no, she tries to control God, for crying out loud. But let's get away from that. Let's just talk about Jesus' humanity. She tries to control a family member. She tries to control her son and doesn't allow him to be who he is and to do what he wants to do. A grown man, for crying out loud, right? The really sad truth is that our closest family members sometimes can be our greatest aggressors. They can be sometimes the people who are putting those roadblocks in front of us saying, no, this isn't who you are. No, you can't be this. And that really hurts when it comes from the people that we want to lean on for our support and for really to be validated. But instead they choose to want to control us and take us away from who we believe that we need to be. And we are. The issue here is not just about control in someone telling you what to do, but it's control in someone telling you who to be, who you are, not allowing you to be who you are, but making you be who they expect you to be. So you have to sacrifice who you are in order to please them, in order to be shaped in their image. That's not God's design. God did not design you to be shaped into the image of somebody else and to be controlled by somebody else to deny who God made you to be. God made you to bring glory to him and to reflect his glory in some way in the uniqueness of who you are. Family, man, go figure, eh? Like, again, you can pick your friends, but you can't pick your family. So what's a guy to do? What are you to do if you have a toxic family member? Okay, so here's what Jesus does about this. This moment of confrontation, he's kind of at a crossroads here. He's got to do something about this. He's either going to choose to go along with his mom, his family, all of his family's there. I guess we could call them his half-brothers because they're, biologically speaking, they're not related at all, right? So what's Jesus supposed to be doing here? And so here's what he does. If you've got a toxic family member that you're trying to deal with and you're trying to figure out, this is what Jesus does. In my opinion, Jesus creates a boundary, okay? Boundaries are invisible, but they are there. Boundaries are invisible demarcations saying this far and no farther, right? Boundaries. It's that Gandalf moment saying, "You shall not pass." That's a boundary. You're not getting past here. You can't see boundaries, but they're there because there are rules around them. Wherever there are rules, there are boundaries. They keep things out, and they also keep things in. They allow things to come in, and they disallow things to come in. For an easy example, there is a boundary around every single building that's around us. And that boundary is the little symbol on the outside of the door that says no smoking. There is a rule that we are not allowed to smoke inside public buildings. There's a boundary around, even though we can't see a physical boundary around the building, there's a rule in place. And that rule in place has created a boundary. Jesus creates a new rule right here, right now, in this text. And he's never gone back on this rule. The rule is still here. He creates a new rule. Here's his rule. He says that his family will now be those who choose to receive him and follow him and share his mission. That's his mother, that's his brothers, that's his sisters. Those who choose to follow him and those who choose to be on mission alongside him. That's his family member. So in this moment, Jesus creates a boundary. And unfortunately for Mary, Mary finds herself outside of this boundary, and she's not able to get inside that boundary because there's a rule in place now keeping her out. Boundaries are rules that we set to protect our identity, and to make sure everything that's going around us is as safe and as healthy as possible. Do you have a toxic family member pressing in on you? You may need to make a boundary. You need a rule that protects yourself from toxicity, right? You maybe start by asking, in what way is this family member infringing on my personality, infringing on my purpose? Or make it more simple, in what way are they not allowing me to be me, right? That's a good question to ask. In what way is this toxic family member not allowing me to be me? Because if that's the case, then they're trying to shape me into their image, which is denying who God has made me to be. And that's going to suck for me, and I'm not going to like it, and it's not going to be healthy for me. So in what way are they not allowing me to be me? Okay, ask that question. And when you know the answer to that question, create a rule. And something like this. Say something like, I'm sorry, but I will only speak with you if you choose to stop swearing and yelling at me and calling me a loser. When you swear and yell at me and belittle me for who I am, the rule is that I will hang up on you. I won't answer emails from you. I'm going to block you on social media. I'm not sure what the rule is that you have to make. But if somebody is toxic, if a family member is treating you toxically, then you need to create a rule. You need to set up a boundary that indicates to them, when you keep this rule, we're in relationship. When you break this rule, we're now out of relationship, and there's a penalty that's going to happen. If you don't allow me to be me, if you come and swear at me and shout at me all the time and belittling me for who I am, then the rule is I'm no longer going to respond to you. I don't want this in my life. However, if you can stop swearing at me, and if we can have an adult conversation, and if you stop belittling me, but you recognize who I am as a person, okay, then yeah, we're in a relationship, and we're going to be able to talk again and work things out. Wow, man, it's so hard, eh? Like toxic family members, so hard. And this is so heartbreaking. Like people have a lot of trouble putting up boundaries around their family because there's this real connection that we have with our family, and it is really hard to deny that biological connection that we feel, that emotional bond that we feel. But the reality is that if they're toxic, then we need to create a good boundary around us and them. And you know what? This rule, by the way, is still true today. To be considered a friend of God, part of his family, we still need to receive him with our faith and choose to follow him and work at joining him on mission. He never changed that rule. That rule is still in place. Relationships are conditional. All healthy relationships have conditions. And if the conditions aren't met, then there's no relationship. Relationships that are unconditional, they're abusive. If you're in a relationship that has no conditions, that means the people who are in that relationship with you, they're not held accountable for anything that they do because there's no conditions. You're getting abused, you're getting beat up, or you're abusing somebody else and you're beating them up. Unconditional relationships are very unhealthy. They're toxic. Relationships, healthy relationships, good relationships that honor you and that honor everybody in the relationship, they're conditional. Our relationship with God is conditional. If we want to honor God, if we want to be in a good relationship with God, we need to meet the conditions of that relationship. And the conditions of that relationship are, we need to place our faith in Jesus, and we need to choose to follow him and get on his mission. Be interested in what he's interested in. You know, this also goes another way. Maybe we could also be asking ourselves, are we the toxic family member, right? Because we're not perfect. We may be receiving toxicity from somebody else. We also may be giving toxicity to somebody else. We may be invalidating a family member that we have. We may be trying to control a family member. In what way are we toxic to the family members around us so that now we're in an adult relationship? They are the ones that need to create rules, and we find ourselves outside of the boundary that they have created for us. Has anyone in your family locked you off? Has anyone in your family told you something like, hey, you know what, I'm not talking to you because you're treating me like this? That's a boundary. There's a rule there. They've set up a boundary. What they've just told you is they feel you're an unsafe person, and you're creating an unhealthy relationship with them. So they're sharing with you, I feel you're toxic. I don't want it this way. So if you will keep this rule, we can be in relationship. If you can't keep this rule, we can't be in relationship. No one's perfect. Maybe you have some toxicity too that you need to work on. Well, you're also working on creating safe boundaries around people that are treating you toxically. Okay, let me wrap this up. Let me give you a takeaway, nice and simple at the end here for this really heartbreaking subject of Jesus creating a boundary around Mary, as toxic as she was in that moment, which is completely surprising. I'm totally surprised that Mary actually took it to this level and led her whole family against Jesus with this toxicity. That I was completely shocked as I was reading this. I know the first time I was reading, it's like, Mary, what's going on? You heard directly from God, like what is going on with you, right? You should, of everybody on the planet, you should have been the one supporting him, right? What do you do with the toxic family? Well, here's a takeaway. Okay, let's do what Jesus did. Create a rule that puts in place a safe boundary, protecting who God made you to be, your purpose, and the mission that you've been called into, right? Make a rule to create a safe boundary. If you need help with that, there's people that you can reach out to who can help you with that. Namely, pastors, therapists, counselors, those are coaches. Coaches are great. What do you do, though, a second takeaway here, what do you do, though, if you're the toxic family member and you've already broken a relationship and you're on the outside of a boundary and it hurts? What do you do about that? If you've been the one locked on the wrong side of the boundary, like Jesus' mom was locked on the wrong side of the boundary, then there's damage there that you've caused. And it's possible that you may need some help to navigate that damage before that boundary ever comes down. If you've been locked out of a relationship and it's long term, you're going to need some help with that. Don't try to navigate that alone, in my opinion. Start by coming to Jesus. Start by working on yourself. Start by being a follower of Jesus and getting rid of some of that toxicity that's inside of you by surrendering it to Jesus and really leaning into him and allowing him to help shape you and allowing him to start working on some of your broken parts. The best way to bring down the boundary that somebody has placed in between you and them is to work on you. And to just to let Jesus change you and to let Jesus work on some of your broken parts, because he loves you and he wants to restore you and he wants to make you better and he wants to make you healthier and stronger. Start to work on you. And then if you really want that boundary to come down between you and the other person that you've hurt, then you're probably going to need help with that. You're probably going to need to speak to a counselor, speak to a therapist, speak to some kind of life coach, and get some help to navigate those broken relationships. I know it's hard. We all deal with brokenness in our life, but I tell you, Jesus loves you, and Jesus is a miracle worker, and he can do a miracle in you. Okay, so there we go. Either create a boundary or go to Jesus and work on yourself. That's it from me for now. See you next week. If you are not yet part of a community, would you please consider joining us in our Zoom meetings as we gather. We're creating new gatherings now, so we're meeting on Sundays at 10:30. Typically that's for adults. We meet at 10:30, about an hour and a half, probably, somewhere around there, on our Zoom call. And also the youth now are starting to meet Sundays at 7 o'clock, and they're just kind of hanging out and doing the youth thing. So if you want to get in on one of the meetings, saying, hey, I'll make a meeting just for you too. If you've got a great idea about how we can connect in a different style of meeting, we can do that too. So that's it from me for now. See you next time.